Let's take a look at how cinematography and camera movement can make your animations much more dynamic.
Tip Tut.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Tip Tut. Today we are taking a look at a cool visualization technique to help you make your animations more dynamic by visualizing and animating with a virtual camera as opposed to just pointing your camera at an object and animating that. So for example, I have here just a brief scene. Now the software I'm using for this tutorial doesn't matter, but it's just Adobe Animate 2021. And you can see that I have a little animation here where I've indicated what the camera sees, i.e. the stage, and a sort of overhead view of the action that's happening here along the right. So we've got our camera looking at a side-on view of our ball. It comes across, it hits our block and knocks it over. Perfectly acceptable animation, nothing too crazy about it. We can make this much more dynamic by just applying a very simple principle. And that's just the principle of cinematography, a film term, which basically means it's the art of framing your subjects or your locations or everything that's inside the frame of the camera lens and the way that you frame and manipulate and position those options. For example, if I were directing this scene, I might use a combination of still cameras and moving cameras to add dynamism to my scene. For example, my first shot might just be the ball flying through the air and then whipping towards the camera, at which point we would cut to a camera which is following and attached to the ball as it comes down on like a sort of, or not a bird's eye view, but a very high angle shot coming down onto the top of the block, before then cutting to the shot that we already have animated here, which is the straight on shot of the ball hitting the block. Essentially, what I've put together is a little diagram which is going to help you think about how to use your camera movement to allow you to be a little bit braver when you're animating. The reason most of us do an animation that just looks like this when we're beginners is because it's easy to envisage, it's easy to understand, and it's easy to animate. But I'm going to show you how just with simple shapes like this, you can make something much more dynamic. So taking these shots into account, which is our cinematography, we are going to use this little diagram here to understand how we're going to move the camera around the flying ball to make it much more dynamic. So let's just jump right into that and get to animating. So the first thing we need to do is understand and think about how our camera is going to move. So for this first shot here, where the ball flies across the screen and then it's going to turn towards the camera, okay, and sort of approach the camera at speed, you need to think about how your camera is going to be moving throughout that time. For example, I'm going to draw my camera path here in red, and the blue path is the path that the ball is going to take, which is just a straight line towards the camera. Because this is top down, we don't actually see that it's going to kind of drop like that, isn't it, the ball? But we don't see that because this is top down. But our camera, if the ball is going to move along this path, we need our camera to sort of swoop around to the front, so that the camera is then pointing towards our ball and looking at it. Then as the ball moves forward and comes towards the camera lens, we're going to cut that camera and we're going to move to another one. So this first camera movement is essentially just going to be crossing over this 180 line, which is the line that the camera points towards. Now, interesting fact, the 180 degree line, it should never be crossed over with the camera. Otherwise, objects in your scene are going to look like they're jumping around. But if you physically move in a continuous smooth motion over the 180 degree line, then you can do that, which is what we're going to be doing with our camera here. So say, for example, we start here and say 12 frames. We take our camera. I'm just going to keyframe it and I'm going to just swing it around my camera line like this. Okay. Then we're going to use just a classic tween just to show the movement of that camera. So our camera is essentially just going to do this for our first camera movement. Now, it's also going to start following the ball. So you'll notice it's going to be moving forwards as well. So maybe the first thing it does for a few frames is actually just follow our ball a little bit and then start to rotate. So we get a little bit of vertical movement as it tracks the ball and then it spins around. Now let's give ourselves a little bit of breathing room here. And we're just going to start one shot at a time and go forward and make our way through it. So what would our ball look like when we're animating with this particular camera movement. Okay, excuse me, I've got my mouse on the other screen there. So what would our ball look like? Well, we know that our ball is probably just going to move from here to about here in our first camera movement, and it's just going to go in a straight line. Okay, easy peasy. So let's take our ball here, and I'm just going to give myself a few keyframes, and I'm just going to draw inside the stage what that's going to look like. So from the first frame to the 5th frame, we've just got a camera that is moving in a straight line and following the ball. So I'm just going to give myself a new blank keyframe. Oh, excuse me, not on the stage layer, but on the ball layer. And I'm just going to add, using all my normal animation techniques, so squash and stretch, etc., we're going to have the ball be whipping into view. Now, the only thing you're going to have to think about here is the speed of the camera in relation to the speed of the ball. Because yes, the ball is moving, but then the camera moves with the ball as well, which actually means that pretty quickly, i.e. I'd say the next frame, the implied speed, the relative speed of the ball is going to be much less because we're moving with the camera. So any squash and stretch that is applied to it is going to start to diminish, even though our ball isn't slowing down. Okay, it just looks like it is because the camera is catching up to move along with that same speed. So say, for example, on the next frame, and these are all on 1s, which means a new drawing every frame. For the next frame, our ball is going to catch up to the camera because it's now moving with the same speed. Okay, straight after that, next frame, our camera is now moving along with the ball. So it's caught up to it. So it's going to look like, if I turn off onion skin, you'll be able to see. For example, frame 4, we have the field of view of our camera, and at the moment our ball is just here, like so. Well, technically it's more like a little bit further down because it's not quite central in the frame. Yeah. So you just got to think about what your camera sees and then positioning that inside the stage. And this little overhead view here just helps you visualize that. In the future, you do all this inside your head, but this is a great way for beginners to figure it out. So turning back on onion skin, we have our ball that is now, center frame. Okay, let's fill that in. So quite simple animation so far, like that, okay? Now we have the rest of this camera movement, which is going to need to be on 2s because we don't want this movement to be very, very fast. So as the camera begins to swing around here, we know that we've got some time to work with. So let's pop all these on 2s, and if we need to, we can pop them all on 1s to fix it, but I don't think we will, okay? Now, the camera is starting to turn around, and if we picture our ball, which is still moving, it's now going to be getting closer and closer each frame to the lens of the camera, yeah, before it whips past it. Now, what this means is we're going to have to draw our ball getting closer to the frame within our frame. So what that means is you just draw it getting a little bit bigger. And this is why we started with such simple drawings, because it helps to understand the concept without getting bogged down by details like character, okay? So on the next frame, if you wanted to, you could just copy, paste in place with Control-Shift-V, scale it up, move it over. So you can see that the ball is getting very close to our camera. It's going to almost fill it up. And then at this point, I would just actually fill this half of the frame that we're in. Okay. Boom, like that. So we have our ball whipping, following along with the camera. The camera catches up to it. As the camera starts to turn the corner, the ball approaches the screen. Boom. Yeah, boom. Now at this point, the camera's going to cut to a different angle, and the ball has made its way past our camera frame. So that's why it disappears. And what I'm going to do is position the camera now behind our ball that flies through the air. So I'm going to give myself a resting frame there. Just hit F6, and I'm going to rotate our camera around. And it's going to be just positioned behind the ball here like this, okay? perhaps here. And we would be jumping over the 180 line if we did that here. But that would position our ball on the left-hand side of the frame, like this. Okay. And if we did it so we were looking down at the block, we could have our block, you know, looking down like so, as if we're coming down onto it. And we're going to have our camera follow that. So we'll take our camera and for 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, make it 12 frames. We'll just have our camera follow the ball. Okay, just like that. Create a classic tween. And now we've got our camera movement as we can envision it. Okay. I don't mind that I'm jumping over the 180 line now. I don't really give a crap. There's not enough subjects in the scene for it to really matter. It's more when you've got characters and actors in the scenes that you don't want to look like they're jumping all over the place. So from there, I'm just going to hit F7. And here we should have a blank frame, which we do. And the ball now, I'm just going to put flipped to the other side because the camera is going to be quite close to the ball. Like so. Okay. And on the next frame, we're going to have the ball be a consistent distance away. So if we add in all of our frames here, as the camera moves, we'll have the ball move too, just so that it's equidistant from the camera at every single interval. And I'm not worried over here. I'm not worried about squash or stretch or anything like that. It's just purely the path motion, okay? So in our brain, we know that the camera is following closely behind our ball. Now, what does that mean for our drawing? Well, our ball is probably going to settle in to its position, but because the camera's following it, there'll be no squash and stretch and there'll be very little scale change. So we'll just have it settle in with a few frames by scaling down just a little bit. But then for the remainder of these frames, this ball is just going to be pretty much in the exact same position because our camera is attached to it. You can almost picture a rod between the camera and the ball that's holding them at fixed distances, okay, so that they can't get any further away or closer from each other. Like so. Now, boom, we have a ball that's whipping around the screen. We're almost doing like the reason this jumping over the 180 line works is because we're almost doing a continuous movement. If I were to classic tween here, you could see that the camera does actually continue this path. If I just draw the path in, let's do it in red. If I were to continue this path, our camera is actually doing that and then making its way forwards. Okay, so that's why jumping over the 180 line doesn't really matter. It's just happening so quickly, something which you couldn't achieve physically, but with the magic of animation, you can achieve no problem at all. So from there, our camera is going to cut again. So I'm just going to move what I have here is just the previous drawing of the block and the floor. So we're just going to move the block and the floor drawings over to this frame because that's when our camera is going to cut away back to that last shot. Okay, but we're not quite finished with this shot here yet because we want to show the ball. The ball is still moving, and not only is it moving horizontally, it's moving closer to the box as well. So we are now going to have to draw in perspective our box. Now we're looking down above. The ball is, where is the ball at the moment? The ball is pretty much here at the moment, and our box is way, way far away, but we're also looking down at the box from an angle. So if this were our box here, our ball is like up here. So we're just looking down at that from an angle, which means that we'd probably see it something like this, where we can see the top of the box quite clearly. And we're looking down through the box. I think I've drawn on all the other frames there. Drawn through the box as well. So we'll continue to do that. Okay. Next frame, the ball is moving with the camera, but we are still approaching the box, which means the box is going to have to get just a little bit bigger. And also, what I'd like to do is change the angle as well, because as it's falling down, we're going to see more of the verticality of that box as well. As the ball comes down to sort of attack it like this, we're going to be looking more dead on. So again, we're just getting it bigger and bigger with each frame as we approach the box. And obviously as you approach as well, the perspective is going to change a little bit. And I'm not a master of perspective, but this should look fair enough. Should look pretty good because we're just coming directly down onto it. And the ball is rushing down towards this box. So if we draw through like that, now we get to the point where probably it's going to start to be so big. Excuse me, if I just rotate my canvas, trying to draw with all this equipment around you gets a bit tough sometimes. Rotate the canvas a little bit because our ball is going to be really close to our box now. Rushing in to attack it. Okay. And I think maybe we've gone one frame too far there. So I'm just going to remove these 2 frames. Whoop, like that. And this time the box, nice and easy. Moment before impact, it's just rushed up to meet it. And all this area is now box. Okay. So. Now it looks a little bit wonk there. And to fix that, I think we can just take our boxes as it closes in and just shift them over so that it's attacking more directly. If I just erase those sections for a moment, I can shift it over like so. Because you need to make sure that the viewer's eye doesn't have to move too much, which will allow you to follow the animation a bit easier. So for example, in this frame here, it wouldn't be like this because we want the viewer's eye to stay with the ball to make it nice and easy. So what we'd probably do is just scale it up like so that it smacks dead on. Okay. Bomb. So we now have our camera whipping around, following the ball along here. Okay. And the ball rushing down to hit the box. So then the last thing is to choose where your final frame is. And I've already animated the box falling over. Like so. So at this point, I think I'd like the camera to cut. So we'll do it here. Excuse me, I just put a blank keyframe there when what I need is a keyframe. I'd like the camera to cut. I'd like it to position itself from the side, so in a similar view to the original shot. But I'd like it to quickly zoom out a little bit. So we'll classic tween that so that it backs off a little as it falls over. If we add in some ease out as well, that will make it settle into that movement a little bit. So what we've got now, if we add to our camera path, is we do have a direct cut, the first cut of the camera. And all it does is back off a little bit. And we'll make that camera path red. Okay. So bam, it cuts. We have our ball here. Oops, that's white. Let's take a blue. There you go. Pretty much there at this point, or maybe even our ball's even there at this point. This is where it hits and knocks over our object. Okay. So we have the block falling over here. I'm just going to go back to my before frame and I'm just going to copy these frames because there's no point in me drawing them twice. And from, let's say, here, we can paste those frames. Now you can see straight away the difference. Okay, so if we just add in all those so that it maintains on the screen for us. We have our ball flying towards the camera, which adds loads of dynamism straight away. The camera whips around in a quick pan, follows our ball down towards the block before. I mean, we'd probably start from here rather than there because we've just done all that animation. So essentially we just replace those first 3 frames. These first 3 frames here where the ball just whips towards our box and then it hits it and knocks it over. The bit where it's just whipping towards the box, we've made so much more dynamic by adding cinematography and camera movement to the exact same action. So let me show you something. Let's watch the first one. Perfectly acceptable animation. Nothing wrong with that at all. Okay. Ball flies through the air, hits the box, knocks it over. Now let's watch the next version. Tell me which one you prefer in the comments below. It's okay if you prefer the first one. There's definitely a style of animation that suits that. But all I know is that with a simple bit of cinematography and a simple bit of camera movement, we have added to this animation so much more power, so much more dynamism, and a level of intrigue and interest that just wasn't there before. And all we did was picture in our brains the movement of the camera and animated the simple forms to follow that. So this visualization technique, really powerful if you're struggling to add dynamism, interest, and a professional level of cinematography to your animations. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I know this is a bit of an abstract concept to understand, but that's why I've tried to visualize it like this. Let me know if you'd like other tutorials in this kind of style. I really enjoy doing them and sort of breaking them down into the core concepts of, cinematography and animation and things like that. So if you enjoy these, great. Leave a comment below saying what you enjoyed about it, and hopefully I can make more tutorials like this in the future. So thanks very much for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you next time for another episode of TipTut. An absolutely massive thank you to my level 2 and above members: WN62, Anonymous, Mel M. Hoover, Maybe Sharma, Ralika M, Ian Costello, Dushyant Singe, Lone Wolf 16, Starry Tichi, Katmar, Wembembo, Rob V, Jason Carl Ruddy, JK Digital Creations, Ali the Saucier, Al Talib, and Da Vinci Goel. You guys are lovely, and this is quite a long list now, so thank you so much for supporting me. If you'd like to become part of the TipTut Zone and get access to exclusive perks yourself, please consider clicking that join button below.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.